This series was set up as a learning experience. We have not set it up as any kind of an opportunity for debate or anything along those lines. I think for the most part, everyone has been respectful of the speaker, and I just want to remind you that even though your beliefs may be different than our speaker today or any of the speakers we've had, this is a time for respect and understanding, and I hope that you will all go along with me on that. I'd like to introduce our speaker today. This is Mazo. He is the rabbi at the temple, Adat, B'nai, I said it wrong twice, B'nai Israel in Evansville. Gary and his wife Gloria moved to Evansville about a year and a half ago from Cape Cod, Massachusetts, so they're thinking this is like Florida weather we're having. And they have 6 children, 3 on the East Coast and 3 on the West Coast, and he attended Brandeis University for his undergraduate in anthropology, and got his master's degree, is that correct? And his rabbinic ordination degree at the Hebrew Union University College. Well, I'm just messing it totally up. But anyway, please help me welcome Rabbi Mazo.
Thanks, Jeanette. I want to thank you, first of all, for inviting me to be here. You have, I'm assuming in this community, you have some Jewish friends. You know that there is no such thing as a single Jewish opinion on anything. And certainly, this topic, even more so. So, what I want to do today, we're going to talk about some history. We're going to talk about some perspectives. Please understand, I never say I speak for I don't speak for the entire Jewish community of Evansville. I certainly don't speak for the entire Jewish community in the world, and I certainly don't speak for the state of Israel. I am Jewish. We view Israel as a Jewish homeland. Many of us who live outside of Israel have great difficulties and problems with what we see happening within the state of Israel. If it's possible for a government to function even less than our own government in this country, that's the Israeli government for a whole host of reasons, and we can talk about that as well. Jews are all over the place when it comes to the peace process, and we talk about the Middle East conflict, however you want to describe it. There really is no good word to describe what really has been, untenable chaos for so long. But we're all over the place in terms of, it's an emotional issue, it's a political issue, it is a religious issue for some. I should say, because I think this is important, I'm a Reform rabbi. Reform Judaism is the largest branch of Judaism here in America, but not in Israel. In Israel, thanks to the British, the Orthodox sort of have the monopoly on religion, and so a lot of religious practice and some political practice gets tied to the Orthodox, which are not the majority of Jews throughout the world, and that creates difficulties, for us in this country. To give you an example, if I work with somebody who studies to convert to Judaism and they work with me, the rabbinate in Israel won't accept that conversion as valid because I'm a Reform rabbi. So we have that schism within the Jewish community, but that also then influences the way we deal with this issue. I'm going to give you a story, and maybe will also then give you a sense of where I come from. It's actually a story about the tie that I'm wearing today. When our son Ari celebrated his bar mitzvah, which is in Massachusetts, and Ari just turned 25. So this was 12 and a half years ago. We always have our kids connect with a charity or organization that speaks to them, and they would donate, some of their own funds, and as Rabbi of the congregation, I would try to bring in speakers around that time. So Ari studied and founded an organization that's based in Maine, which is where a lot of Gloria's family is from, called Seeds of Peace. Seeds of Peace is a summer camp, and it is run in a way that every summer they bring Palestinian kids, they bring Israeli kids, and they bring American Jewish kids together. And they basically, for a month, up in Maine, these kids get all the issues, get all the documents, get all of the, the intricacies of the situation, and the message essentially that they're given is, your grandparents couldn't figure it out, your parents couldn't figure it out. If there's going to be peace, it's going to be your generation. And each year, the kids essentially negotiate and draft an acceptable solution to the Mideast Peace Project. It's an amazing program. So we brought the founders, and we brought a Palestinian and an Israeli kid to come to the congregation and teach about it. And what they did was, because it was his permit, so they gave me this tie and they gave Ari one as well. But when I wear this, I always remember their message. And I remember the hope of hearing young people coming together, working for peace, understanding that concessions need to be made, and understanding the complexity of the issues. Now, I know you guys have heard from many different people. And when I talk about Israel, when I talk about Israelis and Palestinians, I always go back to the biblical story, because that's where it starts, right? It goes back to Abraham. It goes back to the promise that God made to Abraham when he said, this land is going to be the land of your people, and I will make of you a great nation. Now, the mistake that some Jews make is thinking that Isaac was Abraham's only child. Because we know, when we read the book of Genesis, that born before Isaac was Ishmael. And it's a section of the Torah that makes me as a rabbi pretty uncomfortable, right? Sarah's okay initially with Abraham and Hagar having a child, because she can't have a child. Hagar has Ishmael, and then Sarah casts them both away. But in the Torah, what does God say to Hagar? I'll make a great nation of this one as well. So I think when I look at the biblical story, I see very clearly that there is a biblical basis already for two nations having a divine mandated claim to a parcel of land. And speaks to me immediately of, okay, how are we going to do that? How are we going to divide? How are we going to share? I will tell you, if I were an Orthodox rabbi, I would be only speaking about Isaac, and I would say that the promise was made to Isaac, and therefore the entirety of the land of Israel belongs to the Jews. I don't believe that. And I think that's disingenuous, and I think that's part of the issue. Now, that being said, we fast forward throughout history, and this is a region we know that there has been conflict and conquering since even before the Greeks and the Romans and the Ottomans. But I want to bring us a little more to modern time. The reality that Jews were persecuted wherever they lived. That historically there's never been a safe haven for the Jewish people. That every country where we eventually set down roots, at some point the tides turn and anti-Semitism rises. There are always historical, economic factors that tend to lead to that. But society always tends to look for somebody. Find an entire group culpable, we know, is never an answer. That's the history of Judaism. That's the history of the Jewish people. So, for modern Zionism, we tend to maybe the historians touched upon the trial of Alfred Dreyfus. Did that get talked about at all? So he's an officer in the French army, late 1800s, and clearly was blamed for something he did not do, but he was a Jew and he was an officer in the French army. Rampant anti-Semitism came about, and attending the trial was a man by the name of Theodor Herzl, who's considered to be the father of modern Zionism. Herzl had a unique approach to the state of Israel. He basically went to all of the world leaders, sat down with them, and he said, look, you guys hate the Jews. We understand that. And you guys hate the Jews. So here's what we'd like to do. We'd like to find a place where the Jewish people can live in safety and in security, give you an opportunity to rid yourself of a problem within your borders, and give the Jews an opportunity to have some safety and security for the first time in their lives. Sort of an unusual approach to creating a Jewish state. So he convened in Switzerland, because that was always thought to be a neutral place, in around 1898, what was called the first Zionist Congress. And he had religious leaders, he had cultural Jews, he had philosophers, he had academics, he had practicing, strong religious folks and people who didn't really practice their faith at all getting together to figure out where we could find a place that Jews could be safe. And what was interesting is some of the options that were on the table in 1898. Right? The island of Madagascar was the second choice. Why? Because there were a bunch of lemurs living there. That was pretty much it. Nobody's going to bother us there. But one of the things, Grand Fork Island in North America was offered up as an option, as well as Uganda and the land of Israel. And they argued for a week. Because some people at that Zionist Congress said, it doesn't matter where it is. Let's just find a place to be safe. And then others said, well, of course it matters. We have to be here. This is the biblical promise. This is where everything happened. This is where everything started. So, obviously, back and forth and back and forth. And the plan was adopted, and not unanimously, to work towards some semblance of a Jewish state in what was then referred to as Palestine. Fast forward, we have this agreement between Britain and France. It was called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. You may have heard of it, about 1916, 1917 or so. And there was a notion to partition the region into what would be a state of Israel, a Jewish homeland, and what was sort of known as Transjordan, that would be a safe haven for Palestinians. So, with that being said, I want to go through some of the history. We can just kind of pass these back. Now, I find in my congregation, when I hand people stuff out, which is why I didn't give this to you right away, is that there's this human reaction that we start going like this. I'm not asking not to do that. If you can help it, let's try to go sort of page by page. We'll get through, as much of this as we can, but we'll at least have something to bring with you. So everybody has a working copy. One of the other things that we have to remember is that this first map is that this was Britain's idea from 1946. So the borders that we think of today, when we think of Lebanon and Syria and Jordan and Israel and Egypt, they weren't even really secure by the middle of the 20th century. This is all very recent history. We think about our own country how long we've been here, how long it took to sort of have things settle out and understand what the borders were. So, realize 1946, things have changed. Right? Theodore Herzl, 1898, the Jews need a homeland. People buy into this in principle, but it doesn't happen in reality. We go through World War I, and then we go through the atrocities of World War II. Post-World War II, post-Holocaust, there is a lot of emotion. There is certainly plenty of responsibility, and there is a lot of guilt worldwide. So, 1946, right on the heels of the Holocaust, the initial plan by the British actually calls for almost the entirety of what's considered Israel today to be the Jewish home. The understanding was that across the Jordan River, in what they call Transjordan, most of which is the country of Jordan today, is actually where the majority of Palestinians tend to reside. For all practical purposes, that was viewed as a Palestinian region, area, and made sense for a Palestinian state, with Israel almost in its entirety being a Jewish state. Now, the leaders of what was to become the state of Israel knew that this was not going to be a viable option. This was a starting place that Britain sort of put on the table. The United Nations gets involved. Turn to the second page. The United Nations, that body that, in theory, the world turns to hopefully help mediate and solve some of these issues, the UN creates a partition plan in 1947. Again, not unanimous in its approval by the Security Council and by the UN as a whole, but you can see, you don't have the colors, but essentially, when we talk about the regions that we may refer to as the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, and I will, I think I need to back up. The way we refer to those regions oftentimes determines somebody's political outlook, right? Again, for Orthodox Jews, for, dare I say, right-wingers in the Jewish community, still referred sometimes to the West Bank, as, Judea or Samaria, using sort of those biblical names to try to say, this is designated Jewish land. West Bank is fairly safe. It is the West Bank region of, the Jordan River. When I have been in Hebron, which is one of the towns, in the West Bank, this is a town that, again, for many Orthodox Jews, they will attach another Hebrew name to the town, because in the Bible, that area is also known as Kiryat Arba, the city of the four. Abraham and Sarah, and where Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob eventually come to be buried. So, the way we refer to these places tends to also give a little hint about where we come sort of politically. Talk about the West Bank, talk about the Gaza Strip, right, that little contested piece, right along the Mediterranean on the left-hand side. So this is the partition plan. What becomes the Jewish state actually is a little sliver in the north, and then a lot of desert that seemed at the time uninhabitable in the south. Jerusalem was an international city, right, so that all the world's religions could go and partake of the holy sites in safety and security. Not ideal, but from the purpose of the United Nations, it was a solution. Now the problem was Jerusalem was smack in the middle, even though it was an international city, smack in the middle of what was to be an Arab state. or Palestine, or however it was going to be referred to, which would make it a little challenging for some people to be able to get there. This is the plan. And so what happens? Flip, you know what? Sorry. I'm ahead of myself. Let's keep that the way that is for now. 1948, May of 1948, Israel is ready to declare itself to be a sovereign state. Israel says, okay, not ideal, but it's time. It's time for a Jewish homeland. The declaration of the State of Israel is approved, ratified, is signed. If you read the document, it encourages Israeli leaders that if there are Arabs and Palestinians that are there, to treat them equally and allow them to be part of the political process, and encourages its neighbors to accept Israel so that they can live in peace. The goal of the United Nations was that Israel would accept the proposal, and that what would become Palestine or the Arab state would accept a proposal, and we would have two autonomous, safe, secure countries. So here's what happens. We know the history. Israel accepts. They declare the State of Israel. They live by the UN partition plan. Within hours, Israel is attacked on all sides. Lebanon, Syria from the north, Jordan from the east, Egypt from the south. This little tiny brand new country attacked from all sides. So from the Arab perspective, the Palestinian perspective, they rejected the UN partition plan, instead choosing war. Israel now needs to defend itself. Arab leaders from Syria, from Lebanon, from Jordan, from Egypt, issue a call to Arabs, primarily Palestinians, living inside Israel proper, to go to the native lands, join the armed forces, destroy the new Jewish state, and then they can return. And what's interesting is that particularly from the Jordanians and the Syrian perspective, those who chose to return and fight to destroy Israel were never actually really welcomed fully back into society and into their countries. It was the Jordanians and the Syrians that built the first refugee camps that we hear about in the West Bank. So we have now displaced nationals, Israel fighting for its existence. We know that Israel is able to win at least that battle, but we know that the war never ends. And Israel exists. There's no access to Jerusalem at this point. And we fast forward to 1967, when once again Israel finds itself at war with every single neighbor around them. Now, the Sinai Campaign is in the 50s, and I think we've got a map about that, right? And we know that Nasser, who was the prime minister, the president of Egypt, again, his goal was to destroy Israel and the Jewish people, and Israel winds up, in defending itself, taking the Sinai Desert as a buffer between Israel and Egypt, knowing that someday it might be a bargaining chip to peace, which it was in peace treaty with the Egyptians. So Israel's attacked again, and Israel defends itself, and this time the borders are pushed out. The West Bank, that area, is captured in the 1967 war, giving access to Jerusalem, but again, in trying to defend itself, pushes what the perceived threat and enemy was on all sides. The Golan Heights taken for security reasons. The first thing Israel did, and this doesn't get documented, when the West Bank was captured as part of the 1967 war, the first thing they did was go to Jordan and say, open up the borders so your people can come home. And the king of Jordan said, it's your problem. We're not taking them. First thing they tried to do, went to Egypt. We have your people in Gaza. Let's open up the border and peacefully let people come home. That's your problem. Israel didn't ask for refugees in these areas, nor did they make the refugee camps. It does not excuse some of what's happened over the years. I'm certainly not going to stand up here and tell you that they have done well. Israel certainly has limited, at times, access to water, electricity, employment, and understandably, there is a level of fear because when borders are open, so too sometimes are radicals who come in, and real damage has ensued. People have lost their lives. And at the same time, the ports along the Mediterranean, where Gaza is located, when you look at this past summer's conflict, where did all those rockets come in and get shot into Israel day after day after day after day? They were not manufactured in Gaza, right? So they came in from somewhere and were given to those who were engaging, in battle with the state of Israel. So trying to maintain a fair flow of supplies and limit weapons that could be used to destroy the state of Israel has always been an issue. So we wind up with a mess. Israel winds up with refugee camps of people that they would love to see, go back to, quote unquote, homelands, who are not welcomed back in their native lands, or who were misled to believe that they can go back to Israel and reclaim their land, because that's why they went there in the first place, because they were told once Israel is destroyed, you go back and you take your home. And an identifiable leadership of the Palestinian people, because there is no one leader to work with, a partner in peace, has been incredibly difficult. And then the matter's made worse by Israel's own political system. So for instance, we have a situation now, so the Prime Minister of Israel is Benjamin Netanyahu, who I oftentimes describe as to the right of Attila the Hun in terms of his own political, ambitions and power. Now, I'm not an Israeli citizen. I don't get to vote. I have no say who the politician is. But you have to understand that Israel's system of government, right, we have a representative democracy here in America. They have a parliamentary democracy in Israel that doesn't work. So it used to be there were two major parties. There was the Likud and there was the Labor. The Likud were the hardliners to the right. The Labor were the moderate to left-wing party. The Labor Party, when it was in power, that's when we had peace treaties and negotiations and working towards peace. The Likud, when they were in power, those were more of the hawks and the hardliners. 20 to 25 party system. So when you're elected, right, the majority might only have 15%. So how are you going to get your 51% in Parliament? You're going to create a coalition with, hopefully, like-minded other parties who pledge their loyalty to you so that you can form a government, but who each come with a laundry list of demands, and as soon as you break them, they threaten to withdraw from your coalition, which brings down your entire government, and you have to have new elections. So essentially, once someone becomes the prime minister, their term is essentially fulfilling the list of requirements and requests from every member of their coalition, and it has very little to do with governing the actual state of Israel. And even a tiny party that only has 5 seats can bring down a government and hold the prime minister hostage. So, what Netanyahu did, unfortunately, was he created a coalition with the Orthodox parties, the religious Orthodox parties in the Knesset, who believe that every inch of the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people, and tonnage can be given back. And their way to ensure this is to build settlements in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And liberal, peace-loving American Jews are pulling out our hair, saying, what the heck are you guys doing? And in Israel, we're seeing these multi-million-dollar settlement complexes going up. And now you have a situation where it becomes even harder to figure out how do you draw borders when you have Orthodox Jews creating settlements in what should be Palestinian and Arab-run communities. So now, what's interesting is there's now going to be another election. And the difference is as stark as can be. And some of the more liberal, moderate politicians from the Labour Party and some of the centrist parties are running on a platform that says very clearly, you want to build a settlement, you want to go live in Nablus or in Hebron or in the West Bank, that's great. You're going to become a citizen of Palestine. Because the only way that there's going to be peace is if we negotiate a two-state solution. And that very clearly needs to be a Palestinian state. You want to come back home? Good luck selling your new home. We'll welcome you back with open arms. And then on the other side, we have, well, how can we even think about giving back land because we have all these Jews who are living there? So it's a mess. We know that. And there is no easy solution. Now, Seeds of Peace, which I love to support, in America there are two major organizations, and it really sort of defines where people are sort of in this political process. There is AIPAC, which is a very powerful, very wealthy Israel Political Action Committee that operates in Washington. Tends to be pretty hardline and pretty to the right. And there is J Street, based out of New York, tends to be moderate and to the left. J Street advocates for a two-state solution. They advocate for Jews in the settlements to get the heck out because they don't belong there. They advocate for peaceful borders. They advocate for open sharing of resources, water, electricity, infrastructure, education, and still try to cling to a vision of hope that there is a potential for peace. AIPAC, in my experience, tends to say, we've tried peace, it hasn't worked. That if, in order for Israel to continue to exist as a refuge from persecution, all of Israel needs to be under Jewish control. I write a check at the end of the year to J Street. That's where I come from. Not where all Jews come from, not where all Jews in my congregation come from. I've had more than one healthy argument with people in this congregation and in other congregations who just see it very differently. I've lived in Israel. First year of our seminary is we spend over a year living in Jerusalem. I've been back about 8 times. I've taken groups. I've gone through the West Bank. I've gone into Gaza. I've gone into Egypt. I only know, though, what I'm able to see and to experience. But I will tell you that I'm going to take some questions. The most compelling story, when I take groups to Israel, one of my dear, dear friends is on a kibbutz, so a settlement in Israel proper, near a lot. So it's a, kibbutz is, everyone knows what a kibbutz is, so a community where they share their resources and profits. And so this kibbutz is one of the pioneers for really making the desert bloom. And it's called Kibbutz Yehel. It's about 25 miles outside of Eilat, the southernmost tip of Israel, right on the border of Jordan. And they created and cultivated the largest pomelo orchards in the world. Pomelos, it's like, giant. It's like a, grapefruit and then some. wonderful fruit, very, very popular in China, that's their biggest customer, and also then, getting more and more popular in North America. So they have the world's largest pomelo orchards, cultivates, 90% of the profits for the kibbutz, and they've become very successful because of it. So when Israel was negotiating with Jordan, when they were signing the peace treaty with Jordan, so there are signed peace treaties obviously with Egypt and with Jordan, that have, for the most part, held pretty well. But part of the peace treaty with Jordan means they needed to go back and make sure that the borders were clear. Well, once they did that, it raised some issues. Now on this kibbutz, the border, which is just a very simple fence that you can step over, was at the edge of the pomelo orchards. Now every day, Ron, my friend Ron, and members of the kibbutz would put crates and crates of pomelo on the other side of the fence. And the Jordanian border guards would drive around at the end of the day, they would take the pomelo, drive them back to Aqaba, that was the closest city, and this went on for years. They would share the bounty of what they grew. So one day, Ron describes this giant stretch, Mercedes limo drives up, and the mayor of Aqaba comes out, stands at the border and says, I want to meet Mr. Yahel. They explain, there's no Mr. Yahel, it's just the name of the kibbutz. But Ron goes down. They agree to meet in a couple of days with their families. So we've got the mayor of Aqaba, we've got the head of this kibbutz over a border fence that's this tall, and Ron brought gifts to him, he brought gifts to Ron, they had their kids, they were passing the kids over the border, and it started this wonderful dialogue between this Israeli community and the leaders of the city. So now we get back to the peace treaty. Turns out that after the 1967 war, somebody from the Israeli side decided to sort of sneak out in the middle of the night and to take the fence and just kind of move it out a little bit. And the problem was that where the border should have been was actually at the beginning of the orchards. So now the kibbutz had a problem. 90% of their livelihood came from the orchards. The kibbutz met, 250 people got together, discussed what the issue was, because this was now in the big negotiations for peace. Unanimously they said, we give Jordan order. Make sure that our children can grow up, Israelis and Palestinians together in peace. Give the orchards, we'll figure something else out. News of this gets brought back to the Jordanian government. The mayor of Aqaba enters into the negotiations. And one of the things that never made the newspapers, but one of the negotiated parts of the peace treaty with Jordan, is that Jordan leases the land back to the kibbutz for $1 a year, in a 100-year lease on lands. So there is partnership. It goes on behind the scenes. You don't read about it, you don't see it on TV, but it is there, and that's where it's going to start. Reasonable Israelis and reasonable Palestinians want peace. Reasonable Israelis understand that there need to be clearly defined borders, and there needs to be partnership. Reasonable Palestinians understand that as well. Problem is, we have radicals on both sides. There are right wings to everything. And the political system there is a disaster, so it doesn't help. And we have history, we have emotion that has created this hotbed of conflict. So, I've been running for a while. So I know that there are some questions. Yeah?
Now that we're planning for all the settlements of that, didn't that pretty much make it impossible for a two-state?
doesn't make it, it only makes it impossible if Benjamin Netanyahu is the prime minister.
This has been dragging on for 40 years now.
Right.
And the Israeli government pays, they have big billboard signs up that they'll pay the people, if they go out and want to live in that settlement, they pay $20,000, $20,000 startup fee.
And again, only as long as the Israeli people continue to elect the same people in charge. But even, again, even your average Israeli sees now what a stumbling block that is. And that's you know, again, that's the right, that's the orthodoxy that has sort of created that scenario. And it has been going on too long. You're absolutely right. But we have to also understand they were this close. Yasser Arafat could have had a Palestinian state. You know, and Israel, you know, there is a line, there's actually a paragraph in the Palestinian national jargon that calls for the destruction of Israel. Had that been removed, had Arafat been able to consolidate power, had he been able to deal with Hamas, which was a growing political threat, there could have been a Palestinian state. And unfortunately, when it fell down, Shimon Peres loses his position, and the Israeli government turns to the right. And that's, you know, we can point to, on both sides, circumstances that have been...
That so-called peace deal, though, that Arafat rejected, was not going to allow them to collect control of any of their airspace, borders, no, they have mineral rights, waterways.
Mineral rights and water rights have been...
It wasn't really going
worked
to
out.
be a state.
Well, it was...
It would have been a start.
It would have been a start. It would have been a start. But yeah, those are all issues that need to be addressed.
Israel was going to still be in control of everything. So what's that?
And I think that, again, average, reasonable Israelis understand that control needs to be ceded, and at the same time, there needs to be recognition and acceptance that Israel also is allowed a sovereign state, and that the desire is not to destroy it.
I have one more
So,
comment.
all right, let's come back, because I know we've got to look into
How does reconciliation come about with Gaza, West Bank?
You know, Gaza's tricky. Obviously, it's a tricky situation, and there are political reasons why sort of Gaza came to be, and that's an issue with the Egyptians. But yeah, to have two areas that are not connected, which had been under separate control, right? So we had, you know, the Fatah party controlling the West Bank and Hamas controlling Gaza. It's a real challenge. It's a real challenge, and everything that has been on the table, from what I understand, to relocating, to transporting. But the importance of Gaza, obviously, is its port. And from Israel's point of view, is we understand the need to have a port, but what you can't bring into the port are weapons that you're going to use in fire and try to destroy us. And that's, again, complicates the issue.